The knock came at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in November, when the first snow was already coating the windows of the small house on Maple Street. Rebecca Martinez had just finished helping her youngest daughter with homework when the sound echoed through their modest living room. Her 3 children, Emma, age 12, Lucas, age 9, and little Sophia, just 6, all looked up from their activities with the same question in their eyes. Nobody ever visited this late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca's hand instinctively moved to the cross pendant around her neck, a habit she'd developed since losing her husband David 2 years ago in that construction accident. Through the frosted glass, she could make out the silhouette of a tall man, shoulders hunched against the cold, but something about his posture suggested desperation rather than threat. What Rebecca didn't know was that opening that door would unravel a mystery that had been buried for 15 years, and that the stranger's past would force her family to confront truths that could either destroy them or make them stronger than they'd ever imagined. The man standing on Rebecca's doorstep looked like he'd been walking for days. His dark coat was soaked through from the sleet, and his graying hair was plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that made Rebecca pause before turning him away. They held the same exhausted desperation she recognized from her own reflection during those first months after David's death. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you so late," he said, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I've been walking since my car broke down about 10 miles back. The gas stations are all closed, and I was wondering, I hate to ask, but could I possibly use your phone to call for help?" Rebecca studied his face in the porch light. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with weather-beaten features and calloused hands that suggested a life of hard work. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place what it was. Maybe it was just the universal look of someone who'd hit rock bottom. "Mom?" Emma appeared behind her, having crept close enough to listen. Her eldest daughter had become fiercely protective since David's passing, often acting more like a second parent than a 12-year-old should have to. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rebecca said softly, then looked back at the stranger. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Fletcher. I'm not asking for much, just a phone call. I can wait outside while I make it." The wind chose that moment to howl through the trees, sending a spray of icy rain across the porch. Rebecca made her decision the way she always did, by asking herself what David would have done. Her husband had never been able to walk past someone in need, whether it was a stranded motorist or a neighbor who couldn't afford groceries. "Come in out of the cold," she said, stepping aside. "But just so you know, my children are here, and I have a baseball bat by the door." Marcus Fletcher managed a weak smile. "I understand completely. I have kids too." Had kids, the correction came out so quietly, Rebecca almost missed it, but the pain in his voice was unmistakable. As Marcus stepped into the small entryway, Rebecca noticed he moved carefully, favoring his left leg. His boots were worn through at the soles, and when he removed his coat, she could see his flannel shirt had been mended multiple times. "Lucas, could you bring Mr. Fletcher a towel from the linen closet?" Rebecca asked her middle child, who had joined his sister in staring at their unexpected visitor. "Yes, Mom," Lucas replied, but he kept glancing back as he headed down the hallway, clearly fascinated by this development in their usually quiet evening routine. "The phone's right there on the kitchen counter," Rebecca said, pointing to the cordless handset. "Take your time." Marcus looked at the phone, then back at Rebecca. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." As he dialed, Rebecca busied herself making coffee, though she kept one ear tuned to his conversation. She heard him speak to someone about a tow truck, then about a motel room. The responses he received apparently weren't encouraging because his shoulders sagged further with each call. "Everything closed until morning," he said after hanging up. Tow truck can't come out until daylight because of the weather, and the only motel with a vacancy is 40 miles from here. Little Sophia had wandered into the kitchen during his phone calls and was now studying Marcus with the uninhibited curiosity that only 6-year-olds possess. "Are you hungry?" she asked suddenly. "Mom made soup for dinner, and there's lots left." "Sophia," Rebecca said gently, "Mr. Fletcher probably needs to figure out where he's going to stay tonight." But Marcus was looking at the little girl with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. "That's very kind of you to offer," he said to Sophia. "What kind of soup?" "Chicken and rice," Sophia announced proudly. "I helped make it. I put in the carrots." "I bet you did a great job with those carrots," Marcus said, and for the first time since arriving, his smile seemed genuine. Rebecca found herself studying his face again. There was definitely something familiar about him, but she was certain they'd never met. Maybe he just had one of those faces that reminded you of someone else. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe Monday. The days kind of run together when you're traveling." The admission settled it for Rebecca. She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Sit down. I'm heating up some soup." "Ma'am, I couldn't, Rebecca," she corrected. "And yes, you could and you will. I've got 3 children who need to see that we help people when they're in trouble." As Rebecca ladled soup into a bowl, she noticed her children gradually migrating toward the kitchen. Emma maintained her protective stance near the doorway, but Lucas had claimed the chair across from Marcus, and Sophia was already chattering away about her day at school. "We learned about pilgrims today," Sophia was saying. "They had to walk really far too, just like you. Were you walking to find a new home?" Marcus's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Something like that," he said. Carefully, "Where did you come from?" Lucas asked, his 9-year-old curiosity overcoming his initial wariness. "Up north," Marcus replied. "Been traveling for about a week now." "Why?" Emma asked from the doorway, her tone still skeptical. Rebecca shot her eldest daughter a warning look, but Marcus didn't seem offended. "Sometimes people need to start over," he said simply. "Sometimes staying in the same place just hurts too much." The words hung in the air, and Rebecca felt her chest tighten. She knew that feeling intimately, the way familiar places could become unbearable when they were filled with memories of someone who was no longer there. "Our dad died," Sophia announced matter-of-factly, the way children sometimes shared devastating information as if it were no more significant than the weather. "He fell off a building." "Sophia," Emma hissed, but Marcus was looking at the little girl with understanding rather than discomfort. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "That must have been very hard." "It was," Sophia said, then brightened. "But Mom says he's watching us from heaven, so it's okay." "Your mom sounds like a wise woman," Marcus replied, glancing at Rebecca. As Marcus ate, the conversation gradually became less stilted. Lucas showed him a drawing he'd made of a spaceship, and even Emma eventually joined them at the table when the discussion turned to her upcoming middle school science fair project. Rebecca found herself relaxing despite her initial caution. There was something about Marcus Fletcher that seemed genuine, even in his obvious desperation. He listened to her children with real attention, asked thoughtful questions about their interests, and never once seemed impatient with Sophia's rambling stories about her kindergarten class. But as the evening wore on, she began noticing small details that didn't quite add up. When Lucas asked what kind of work he did, Marcus hesitated just a beat too long before saying construction. When Emma mentioned their last name was Martinez, something flickered across his face: recognition, maybe, or surprise. And twice, she caught him staring at the family photos on the refrigerator with an intensity that seemed to go beyond polite interest. "Where exactly is your car?" Rebecca asked as she refilled his coffee cup. "About 10 miles north on Route 47, Marcus replied. "Just past the old Miller farm, if you know it." Rebecca did know it. Route 47 was the main highway through their small town, and she drove that stretch regularly on her way to work at the county health department. What struck her as odd was that there were 3 gas stations and 2 motels between the Miller farm and her house. For someone to walk 10 miles past all those options to end up at her door seemed either extremely unlucky or oddly intentional. "The Sinclair station stays open until 11, she said carefully, "and Murphy's Motel is right across from it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his coffee mug. "Must have missed them in the storm," he said. "Sometimes when you're cold and wet, you don't see things clearly." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his tone suggested it wasn't the complete truth. Rebecca decided not to push the issue, at least not in front of the children. "Mom," Emma said, glancing at the clock on the microwave, "it's almost 10:30. We should probably get ready for bed." Rebecca nodded. "Emma's right. School night, guys. Go brush your teeth." As her children headed toward the hallway, each saying good night to Marcus, Rebecca began clearing the dishes. She was acutely aware of being alone with him now, but strangely, she felt no fear. If anything, watching him interact with her children had made her more curious than cautious. "Thank you," Marcus said as she took his empty bowl. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in a long time. Where are you planning to sleep tonight?" Rebecca asked directly. Marcus looked toward the window, where the sleet was still hammering against the glass. "I'll figure something out. Maybe there's a shelter or—" "There's no shelter in Millbrook," Rebecca interrupted. "The nearest one is 30 miles away in Riverside, and the buses stopped running an hour ago." They looked at each other across the small kitchen, and Rebecca found herself making another decision that David would have approved of. "There's a pull-out couch in the living room," she said. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Marcus's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who's been in dark places and knows what it means when a stranger shows kindness." For a moment, Marcus looked like he might cry. "You don't know me," he said hoarsely. "I could be anyone." "Could be, Rebecca." "Agreed. But my gut says you're not anyone dangerous. And my gut's gotten me this far." What she didn't say was that her gut was also telling her there was much more to Marcus Fletcher's story than a simple car breakdown. The way he'd looked at her children, the familiarity she couldn't shake, the odd route that had brought him to her door, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. As she gathered sheets and blankets for the couch, Rebecca found herself thinking about the concept of fate. She'd never been particularly mystical, but David's death had made her more aware of how quickly life could change, how a single moment could alter everything. Maybe Marcus Fletcher's arrival was just coincidence. Maybe it was something more. Either way, she thought as she handed him a pillow, tomorrow would bring answers to questions she didn't even know she should be asking. Marcus accepted the bedding with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from cold or emotion, Rebecca couldn't tell. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "No need," Rebecca replied. "Just get some rest. Things always look different in the morning." As she headed toward her bedroom, Rebecca paused at the hallway entrance. "Marcus, is there anything else you need to tell me? Anything I should know before I leave you alone in my house with my children sleeping upstairs?" Marcus met her eyes, and for a moment she thought he might say something important. Instead, he just shook his head. "Nothing that can't wait until morning." Rebecca nodded and headed to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Through her bedroom wall, she could hear the faint sounds of Marcus moving around the living room, settling in for the night. Several times she thought she heard him talking quietly, though whether to himself or on the phone, she couldn't tell. Just before dawn, she was awakened by a sound she couldn't immediately identify. It took her a moment to realize It was crying soft, muffled sobs coming from the living room. She lay in the darkness, listening, and felt her heart break a little for whatever pain Marcus Fletcher was carrying. What Rebecca didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just crying from exhaustion or gratitude. He was crying because after 15 years of searching, 15 years of following cold leads and false hopes, he'd finally found what he'd been looking for. And now that he'd found it, he wasn't sure he had the courage to claim it. In his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, was a faded newspaper clipping from 2009. The headline read, "Local construction worker dies in fall. Leaves behind wife and 3 children." The accompanying photo showed a young woman with dark hair and tired eyes, standing beside 3 small children at a graveside service. The woman's name was Rebecca Martinez, and Marcus Fletcher knew with absolute certainty that he was the reason her husband was dead. Rebecca woke to the smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was dreaming. It had been 2 years since anyone but her had made breakfast in this house. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up abruptly, checking the clock. 6:15 a.m. She threw on her robe and hurried to the kitchen, where she found Marcus standing at the stove, fully dressed in his clothes from the night before. He'd obviously tried to clean them up as best he could, but the flannel shirt still bore wrinkles from being slept in. "I hope you don't mind," he said without turning around. "I wanted to do something to thank you for your kindness. Found eggs and bacon in the fridge." "You didn't have to," Rebecca began, but Marcus held up a hand. "Please, let me do this." His voice carried a weight that suggested this was about more than just breakfast. Rebecca studied his profile as he worked. In the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, she could see details she'd missed the night before. A scar running along his left temple. Hands that were not just calloused but marked with old burns and cuts, the hands of someone who'd worked with dangerous equipment. And something else. He moved around her kitchen with an ease that spoke of familiarity with domestic routines, as if he'd made breakfast for a family many times before. "Smells good," she said, settling into a chair at the table. "How long have you been up?" "Since about 4, Marcus admitted. "I'm not much of a sleeper these days." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of her children. Sophia appeared first, still in her pajamas with her dark hair sticking up at impossible angles. "The strange man is cooking," she announced with delight, as if this were the most wonderful development imaginable. "His name is Mr. Fletcher," Rebecca corrected gently, though she noticed Marcus flinch slightly at the formal address. Emma and Lucas appeared next, both looking considerably more skeptical about finding a virtual stranger manning their stove. Emma, in particular, positioned herself protectively near her younger siblings. "Mom, can I talk to you?" Emma asked, her tone making it clear she wanted privacy. "After breakfast," Rebecca replied. She recognized the look on her eldest daughter's face. Emma had inherited David's protective instincts and his tendency to worry about things beyond her control. Marcus began plating the food with careful precision, making sure each child got exactly the same portion. Rebecca noticed he gave himself noticeably less than everyone else. "Are you not hungry?" she asked. "I'm fine," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. As the family settled around the table, Lucas broke the somewhat awkward silence. "Did you sleep okay on our couch?" "Sometimes the springs squeak." "I slept better than I have in weeks," Marcus replied, and something in his voice suggested this was completely true. "Where will you go today?" Emma asked pointedly. "After your car gets fixed?" Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I'm not sure yet. South, probably, looking for work." "What kind of work do you do again?" Emma pressed, and Rebecca realized her daughter was conducting her own interrogation. "Construction," Marcus said. "Mostly commercial buildings. Office complexes, that sort of thing." "That's what our dad did," Sophia piped up. He builded tall buildings. Built, Lucas corrected automatically. And he didn't build them, he worked on them. Same thing, Sophia said with the confidence of a 6-year-old who'd never been wrong about anything. Marcus had gone very still. What was your father's name? The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made Rebecca's stomach tighten. David Martinez, Lucas answered proudly. He was the best construction worker in the whole state. Lucas, Rebecca said softly, finish your breakfast. You don't want to be late for school. But Marcus was staring at Lucas with an expression Rebecca couldn't read. Not surprise exactly, but something closer to confirmation of something he'd already suspected. Martinez. Construction, Marcus said quietly. I know that company. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, creating ripples of tension that Rebecca felt but couldn't yet understand. You knew my husband? She asked carefully. Marcus looked at her directly for the first time since she'd entered the kitchen. I knew of him. Martinez Construction had a good reputation. David Martinez was known for his attention to safety. There was something in the way he said it, past tense, formal, like he was reciting facts rather than sharing memories. Rebecca's journalist instincts, honed from years of writing newsletter articles for the health department, began to tingle. Where did you hear about his reputation? She asked. Around, Marcus said vaguely. Construction's a small world. Word gets around about the good crews and the bad ones. Emma was watching this exchange with narrowed eyes. At 12, she was old enough to sense when adults weren't telling the whole truth, even if she couldn't articulate what was wrong. What company did you work for? Emma asked. Marcus hesitated just long enough for Rebecca to notice. Different ones over the years. I'm what you'd call a freelancer. It was a reasonable answer, but something about it felt rehearsed. Rebecca found herself cataloging other small inconsistencies from the night before. His familiarity with the local area, despite claiming to be just passing through. The way he'd looked at their family photos. The route that had brought him to their door. Mom, Sophia said suddenly. Why does Mr. Fletcher look sad when we talk about Daddy? Out of the mouths of babes. Rebecca looked at Marcus and realized Sophia was right. Every mention of David had brought a shadow across his face, as if the name caused him physical pain. Sometimes talking about people who've passed away makes everyone a little sad, Rebecca said carefully, even people who didn't know them very well. Marcus nodded gratefully at this explanation, but Rebecca noticed his hands were trembling slightly. As he reached for his coffee cup, the school bus horn honked outside, breaking the tension. That's our ride, Emma announced, though she seemed reluctant to leave. Mom, are you sure? I'm sure, Rebecca said firmly. Go to school, all of you. As her children gathered their backpacks and headed for the door, each one said goodbye. To Marcus, Sophia even gave him a quick hug, which seemed to affect him deeply. Emma was the last to leave, and she shot Rebecca a look that clearly said, we need to talk about this later. Once the front door closed behind them, the house fell into an uncomfortable silence. Rebecca and Marcus sat across from each other. At the kitchen table, surrounded by the detritus of breakfast and the weight of unspoken questions. You're not just passing through, Rebecca said finally. It wasn't a question. Marcus stared into his coffee cup. No, and your car didn't break down 10 miles north of here. No, so why are you here, Marcus? And please don't tell me it's coincidence that a man who claims to barely know my husband ended up at my door in the middle of a storm. Marcus was quiet for so long that Rebecca began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've been looking for you for 2 years. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Looking for me? Why? Because I need to tell you something about David's accident. Something the official reports didn't include. Rebecca's blood went cold. The official reports. She'd read them dozens of times in the months after David's death, searching for someone to blame, Some explanation that would make sense of why a careful, experienced construction worker had fallen from a building he'd worked on dozens of times before. "What do you know about my husband's accident?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. Marcus finally looked at her, and she saw tears forming in his eyes. "I know because I was there. I was on the same crew that day." The kitchen seemed to tilt around Rebecca. "You were there?" "I was the safety supervisor on the Riverside Office Complex project. October 15th, 2022. Your husband fell from the 8th floor." Rebecca gripped the edge of the table. She knew those details by heart. They'd been burned into her memory during the endless meetings with lawyers and insurance investigators. But no one had ever mentioned a safety supervisor named Marcus Fletcher. "That's impossible," she said. "I met with everyone who was there that day. The foreman, the crane operator, the other workers. No one mentioned you. Because I left before." "The investigators arrived," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Because I was the reason David fell, and I was too much of a coward to stay and face what I'd done." Rebecca stood up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. "What are you talking about?" Marcus buried his face in his hands. "The safety harness system. It was my responsibility to inspect it every morning, to make sure all the equipment was properly maintained. That morning I was running late. I'd been out drinking the night before. My wife had just served me with divorce papers, and I wasn't thinking clearly." Rebecca felt the room spinning around her. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I did a sloppy inspection. I missed a frayed cable on David's harness. When he leaned out to secure that beam, the cable snapped." Marcus looked up at her with eyes full of anguish. "Your husband died because I failed to do my job properly." The words hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Rebecca stared at this man, this stranger who had eaten at her table, slept under her roof, played with her children, and felt her world reshaping itself around a truth she wasn't prepared to handle. "You killed my husband," she said quietly. "Yes," Marcus whispered. "I killed your husband." Rebecca's mind raced through the implications. All those months of wondering why David had been so careless, of blaming herself for not insisting he find a safer job, of watching her children grow up without their father, and the real reason had been sitting in her kitchen, eating her food, accepting her kindness. "Why?" she asked, though she wasn't sure what exactly she was asking. "Why did I run? Because I was a coward. Why am I here now? Because I can't live with what I did anymore." "You've been living with it for 2 years, Rebecca said, anger beginning to replace shock. "Why come forward now?" Marcus stood up slowly, as if his bones ached. "Because 6 months ago, my own son died in a construction accident. A safety equipment failure, just like David. And I realized that karma doesn't just punish the guilty, it punishes their families too." Rebecca sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. "Your son, Jake, he was 24, working on a bridge project in Cleveland when his safety line failed." Marcus's voice was hollow. "The irony wasn't lost on me. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. So you decided to ease your conscience by confessing to the widow you made?" The harshness in Rebecca's voice made Marcus flinch, but he didn't defend himself. "I decided to tell you the truth because you deserved to know it, and because I thought ... I hoped maybe there was something I could do to make amends." "Make amends?" Rebecca's voice rose. "You think there's something you can do to bring back my children's father, to give me back the man I loved?" "No," Marcus said quietly. "I know there isn't. But I thought maybe I could provide for your family the way David would have if he'd lived." Rebecca stared at him. "Provide how?" Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, he placed it on the table between them. "It's a life insurance policy," he said. "Worth $500,000. I've been paying the premiums for 2 years, waiting until I found you. The beneficiary is listed as your children." Rebecca looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. "I don't want your money." "It's not my money," Marcus said. "It's what I owe you. What I should have given you 2 years ago instead of running away." "You should have stayed and told the truth 2 years ago," Rebecca said. "Do you have any idea what we went through?" The investigator said David was careless, that he hadn't properly secured his equipment. "I spent months wondering if he'd been drinking, if he'd been distracted, if somehow it was his fault." Marcus's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to blame David. But you let me. You let me and my children think their father died because he made a mistake, when really he died because you made one." The accusation hung between them, and Marcus had no defense to offer. He'd known this confrontation would be brutal, but experiencing Rebecca's pain firsthand was worse than anything he'd imagined. "What do you want from me?" Rebecca asked finally. "Nothing," Marcus said. "I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth," Rebecca repeated bitterly. "The truth is that my children welcomed you into our home. They fed you, they shared their stories with you, they trusted you, and you're the reason their father is dead." Marcus nodded miserably. "I know." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street where her children caught the bus every morning, where David used to shovel snow in the winter and mow the grass in the summer. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, but everything had changed. "I think you should leave," she said without turning around. "Of course," Marcus said, standing up immediately. "I'll call for that tow truck." "No," Rebecca said, finally facing him. "I mean leave town, leave the state. Go back to wherever you came from and don't ever contact my family again." Marcus nodded, though she could see the gesture cost him. "What? About the insurance policy? I don't want anything from you." "Please," Marcus said urgently. "Whatever you think of me, those children deserve." "Don't you dare tell me what my children deserve," Rebecca interrupted. "You've done enough." Marcus picked up the insurance policy and placed it on the kitchen counter. "I'll leave it here. You don't have to decide now, but think about Emma's college fund. Think about what David would have wanted for them." The mention of David's name in Marcus's mouth made Rebecca's chest tight with rage. "Get out," Marcus nodded and headed toward the living room to gather the few belongings he'd brought with him. As he folded the blankets Rebecca had given him, she watched from the doorway, her mind reeling with questions she didn't know how to ask. "Rebecca," Marcus said as he reached for his coat, "I know you have no reason to believe me, but everything I told your children last night was true. I do have kids had kids, and I know what it's like to lose someone you love. The difference," Rebecca said coldly, "is that you lost someone to an accident. I lost someone to your negligence." Marcus buttoned his coat with hands that shook. "You're right, there's no comparison." He moved toward the front door, then paused. "For what it's worth, David died quickly. He wouldn't have suffered." "Don't," Rebecca said sharply. "Don't you dare try to comfort me." Marcus nodded and opened the door. The morning air was crisp and clear, nothing like the stormy night that had brought him to their doorstep. "I'm sorry," he said one last time. "I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." Then he was gone, walking down Maple Street in the same direction he'd come from, his shoulders hunched not against the cold this time, but against the weight of finally having told the truth. Rebecca stood in her doorway watching until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did she close the door and sink to the floor, her back against the wood, and allow herself to cry for the first time since the night David died. When her tears finally stopped, she looked across the living room at the couch where Marcus had slept, at the kitchen where he'd made breakfast for her children, at the insurance policy still sitting on the counter. Everything he'd told her might be true. But the question that would haunt her for weeks to come was simple. Now that she knew the truth, what was she supposed to do with it? Rebecca spent the rest of the morning moving through her house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. The coffee mug Marcus had used still sat in the sink. The couch cushions bore the impression of where he'd slept. Even the air seemed different, charged with the weight of his confession. She called in sick to work something she'd done only twice since David's death, and sat at her kitchen table staring at the insurance policy. $500,000. More money than she'd see in 10 years at the health department. Money that could send all 3 children to college, pay off the mortgage, maybe even allow her to take that photography course she'd always wanted to try. Blood. Money. At 3:15, the school bus rumbled to a stop outside, and Rebecca quickly shoved the insurance papers into a kitchen drawer. She wasn't ready to explain to her children that the kind stranger they'd welcomed had turned their lives upside down yet again. "Mom!" Sophia burst through the front door like a small hurricane. "Where's Mr. Fletcher? I drew him a picture." Rebecca's heart clenched as she looked at her youngest daughter's artwork, a crayon drawing of 5 stick figures standing around a table, with "My Family and Amar Fleeker" written across the top in uneven letters. "He had to leave, sweetheart," Rebecca managed. "His car got fixed." "But I didn't get to give him my picture," Sophia said, her lower lip beginning to tremble. Emma appeared in the doorway, her backpack still slung over her shoulder and a suspicious expression on her face. "You look weird, Mom. What happened?" "Nothing happened. I just have a headache." Lucas wandered into the kitchen and immediately noticed the absence. Did the strange man really leave? I wanted to ask him more about construction stuff. "He wasn't that strange," Sophia protested. "He was nice. He made us breakfast." Emma studied her mother's face with the intensity of a detective. "Mom, something's wrong. You've been crying." Rebecca should have known. She couldn't hide anything from Emma. Her eldest daughter had developed an uncanny ability to read emotional undercurrents since David's death. "We need to talk," Rebecca said. "All 3 of you, sit down." The children exchanged glances but obeyed, settling around the kitchen table with the wariness of kids who'd learned that serious conversations often brought bad news. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to understand," Rebecca began, then stopped. "How did you explain to children that the man they'd trusted, fed, and welcomed had been responsible for destroying their family?" "Is it about Mr. Fletcher?" Emma asked quietly. Rebecca nodded. "He told me something this morning about your father's accident. Something I didn't know before." "What kind of something?" Lucas asked, his 9-year-old mind already working to fill in the blanks. Rebecca took a deep breath. "Mr. Fletcher was working on the same building site where Daddy had his accident. He was supposed to check all the safety equipment that morning, but he didn't do it properly. That's why Daddy's harness broke." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca watched her children's faces as they processed this information, each one reacting according to their age and temperament. Sophia spoke first, her voice small and confused. "So Mr. Fletcher made Daddy fall?" "Not on purpose," Rebecca said quickly. "It was an accident. But yes, if he had done his job correctly, Daddy would still be with us." Lucas's face was scrunched up in concentration, as if he were trying to solve a complex math problem. But he seemed so nice. "He made us breakfast and listened to my spaceship story." "People can be nice and still make terrible mistakes," Rebecca said gently. Emma's reaction was the most complex. Rebecca could see anger, confusion, and something like betrayal warring across her daughter's features. "I knew something was wrong with him," Emma said finally, her voice tight with emotion. "The way he looked at our family pictures, how he knew about Dad's company. I knew he was lying about something." "You were very smart to be suspicious," Rebecca said. "Your instincts were right. So what happens now?" Emma asked. "Are we going to call the police?" The question Rebecca had been dreading. "I don't know yet. What Mr. Fletcher did was wrong, but it wasn't a crime exactly. He was just careless." "Careless," Emma repeated, and the word dripped with adolescent Outrage. Dad died because someone was careless. Rebecca reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. I know it's hard to understand. It's not hard to understand, Emma said, pulling her hand away. It's just not fair. Sophia had been unusually quiet during this exchange, and when Rebecca looked at her, she was surprised to see tears streaming down her 6-year-old's face. Sophia, what's wrong? I gave him a hug, Sophia whispered. I hugged the man who made. Daddy, go away. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She immediately moved to kneel beside Sophia's chair, pulling her youngest daughter into her arms. Oh, baby, no. You didn't know. None of us knew. You were just being kind, and there's nothing wrong with being kind. But I made a picture for him, Sophia sobbed. I was going to give it to him. Lucas, who had been silent throughout his sister's tears, suddenly stood up from the table. Where is he now? I don't know, Rebecca said truthfully. He left this morning. Good, Lucas said with a vehemence that surprised her. I hope he never comes back. Emma nodded in agreement. I hope his car breaks down again and nobody helps him. Rebecca looked at her children, at Emma's righteous anger, Lucas's protective fury, and Sophia's confused grief, and realized that Marcus Fletcher's confession had reopened wounds that were just beginning to heal. For 2 years they'd been learning to live with David's death as a random tragedy. Now they had to grapple with the knowledge that it could have been prevented. What do we do with all this anger? Emma asked, as if reading her mother's thoughts. It was such a mature question that Rebecca felt her chest tighten with pride and sadness. Emma was growing up too fast, forced to wrestle with adult emotions at 12 years old. I don't know yet, Rebecca admitted. But we'll figure it out together. Over the next few days, the family struggled to return to their normal routine. Rebecca went back to work, the children went to school, and life moved forward with mechanical precision. But underneath the surface, Marcus Fletcher's revelation had changed everything. Emma became even more protective than before, as if she were guarding against the possibility of other devastating surprises. She questioned Rebecca about every phone call, every unexpected visitor, every change in their routine. Lucas threw himself into schoolwork with unusual intensity, as if academic achievement could somehow balance the cosmic unfairness of their situation. Sophia stopped drawing pictures. When Rebecca asked why, her youngest daughter simply said, "What if I give them to the wrong person again?" By Friday evening, Rebecca realized they couldn't continue like this. The anger and confusion were poisoning their home, turning them all inward and suspicious. She needed help processing what had happened, but she also needed to make a decision about the insurance policy still hidden in her kitchen drawer. After the children went to bed, Rebecca pulled out the phone book and found the number for Father Mackenzie at St. Mary's Catholic Church. She'd stopped attending regular services after David's death. Her faith had taken a beating, along with everything else, but Father Mackenzie had been kind during the funeral arrangements. "Father, it's Rebecca Martinez," she said when he answered. "I wonder if I could come see you tomorrow. I have a situation I need to discuss." "Of course, Rebecca. Is everything all right?" "No," she said simply. "It's not." Saturday afternoon, Rebecca sat in Father Mackenzie's office while her children played in the church's small playground outside. The priest listened without interruption, as she told him about Marcus Fletcher's visit and confession. "What a terrible burden for you to carry," Father Mackenzie said when she finished, "and what a terrible burden for him as well." Rebecca bristled slightly. "I'm not particularly concerned about his burden right now." "Of course not," the priest said gently. "You have every right to your anger, but I wonder... What do you think your husband would want you to do?" It was the question Rebecca had been avoiding. "I don't know. David was always more forgiving than me. Tell me about the insurance policy." Rebecca pulled the folded papers from her purse. $500,000. He says it's what he owes us. And you don't want to accept it?" How can I? It feels like I'd be profiting from David's death. Father Mackenzie leaned back in his chair, considering. Or you could look at it as ensuring that your children have the opportunities their father would have wanted them to have. But taking his money feels like forgiving him, and I'm not ready to forgive him. Forgiveness and accepting help don't have to be the same thing. The priest said carefully, "You can take care of your children's future without absolving Mr. Fletcher of his responsibility." Rebecca stared at the insurance policy. What would David do? I think David would want his children to go to college. I think he'd want you to have financial security. Whether that money comes from life insurance he bought or life insurance someone else bought out of guilt. Does that really change what it can do for your family? It was a pragmatic argument, but it didn't address the emotional complexity of the situation. Rebecca folded the papers back up. "There's something else," she said. "I found out where he's staying." Father Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "He's been living in his car in the parking lot behind Murphy's Diner. Apparently he's been there for 3 days. Barely eating, just sitting." "How did you find this out?" "Emma. She asked her friend Carly's mom to drive past there on the way home from soccer practice. She wanted to make sure he'd really left town." Rebecca shook her head. "My 12-year-old daughter is conducting surveillance operations." "And how does that make you feel, knowing he's still here?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Angry, but also, I don't know, concerned maybe, which makes me even angrier. "It's natural to feel conflicted," Father Mackenzie said. "This man destroyed your family's peace, but you're also a compassionate person who doesn't like to see anyone suffering. What kind of person sleeps in their car for 3 days? Why doesn't he just leave? Perhaps he's hoping for something. Forgiveness. Maybe, or perhaps he's simply lost and doesn't know where to go next." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window overlooking the playground. She could see her children playing together, Emma pushing Sophia on the swing while Lucas climbed the monkey bars. They looked happy in this moment, and she realized how rare that had become since Marcus Fletcher's visit. "The kids can't heal while this is hanging over us," she said. "They need closure." "What kind of closure?" Rebecca turned back to the priest. "I think I need to see him again. To tell him exactly what his confession has done to my family. To make sure he understands the full scope of what he's taken from us." Father Mackenzie nodded slowly. "And then?" "And then I want him to leave Millbrook and never come back. But first, I want him to look my children in the eye and explain himself." "Rebecca, are you sure that's wise? The children have been through enough. They have questions they deserve to have answered, and he owes them that much." The priest studied her face. "What if this conversation doesn't go the way you expect? What if he breaks down completely? Or what if the children react badly?" Rebecca had considered these possibilities. "Then we'll deal with it. But we can't move forward while he's sitting in a parking lot 3 miles away, haunting us like some kind of ghost." Father Mackenzie was quiet for several minutes, and Rebecca could see him weighing the spiritual and practical implications of her decision. "If you're determined to do this," he said finally, "would you like me to be present? Sometimes having a neutral party can help keep things from escalating." Rebecca hadn't considered this possibility, but it made sense. "Would you do that? If you think it would help?" Rebecca looked out at her children again. Emma had noticed her watching and waved from the swing set. The gesture was so normal, so reminiscent of the life they'd had before everything fell apart, that Rebecca felt her resolve strengthen. "Yes," she said. "I think it would help. Can we do it tomorrow? Are you sure you want to wait that long?" "Sometimes it's better to act quickly when you've made a difficult decision." Rebecca checked her watch. It was almost 4 p.m. "Tonight then, after dinner. I'll call him and ask him to meet us here at the church. You have his phone number?" "He left it on the insurance policy. For questions," he said. As Rebecca gathered her purse and prepared to collect her children, Father Mackenzie stood up. Rebecca, I want you to think about one more thing before tonight. What's that? Mr. Fletcher has been carrying this guilt for 2 years. Your husband's. Death has been destroying him just as surely as it's been destroying your family. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for him, but I am asking you to remember that sometimes broken people do terrible things without meaning to. Rebecca paused at the door. Are you asking me to forgive him? I'm asking you to be open to whatever happens tonight. Sometimes the conversations we think will bring us closure end up changing us in ways we never expected. Rebecca nodded and headed toward the playground to collect her children. As she walked, she rehearsed in her mind what she would say to Marcus Fletcher. She would be calm, clear, and definitive. She would let him see the damage his confession had caused, and then she would send him away forever. What she didn't anticipate was that Marcus Fletcher had spent the last 3 days in his car thinking about his own damaged children, and that he was prepared to do something desperate to make amends for the pain he'd caused. The phone call she was about to make would set in motion a confrontation that would force all of them, Rebecca, her children, and Marcus himself, to decide what justice really meant, and whether redemption was possible for someone who had already lost everything. The phone rang 4 times before Marcus answered, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "Hello. This is Rebecca Martinez," she said, standing in her kitchen while her children finished their Saturday dinner. "We need to talk." A long pause. "Rebecca, I thought. You asked me to leave town." "I did. But you're still here, living in your car behind Murphy's Diner, like some kind of vagrant. My daughter had to drive past there to confirm you'd actually left. I was getting ready to go, I just—" "No," Rebecca interrupted. "You don't get to. Explain yourself to me over the phone. If you're going to disrupt our lives, if you're going to confess to killing my husband and then camp out in our town like you're waiting for something, then you're going to face the consequences properly." Another pause, then Marcus's voice smaller now. "What do you want me to do?" "Meet me at St. Mary's Church tonight at 7 o'clock. Bring whatever you haven't told me yet, because this is your last chance to come clean." "Rebecca, I don't think." And, "Marcus, my children will be there. They have questions, and you're going to answer them. All of them." She hung up before he could respond. Emma looked up from her plate of spaghetti. "You called him?" "We're going to settle this tonight," Rebecca said. "Once and for all." "At church?" Lucas asked, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "Father, Mackenzie is going to be there too." It seemed like the right place for difficult conversations. Sophia had been unusually quiet during dinner, pushing her food around without eating much. "Will Mr. Fletcher be mad at us?" "He doesn't get to be mad at us," Emma said fiercely. "We didn't do anything wrong." Rebecca knelt beside Sophia's chair. "Baby, Mr. Fletcher might be sad or upset, but not because of anything you did. And if you don't want to talk to him, you don't have to. But I thought you might want to ask him questions." "What kind of questions?" "Whatever you want to know. About Daddy, about what happened, about why he came to our house." Sophia considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "Okay, but I'm not giving him my picture." An hour later, Rebecca and her children walked up the steps to St. Mary's Church. The autumn evening was crisp, and Rebecca could see their breath in the air. She'd chosen the church because it felt neutral, a place where strong emotions might be tempered by the weight of sacred space. Father Mackenzie met them at the side entrance, his expression gentle but concerned. "Are you sure about this, Rebecca?" "No," she admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." The priest led them to a small meeting room adjacent to the main sanctuary. It had a round table surrounded by chairs, soft lighting, and religious artwork on the walls that somehow made the space feel both formal and comforting. "I'll be right outside if you need me," Father Mackenzie said. "But I think this conversation needs to happen between your family and Mr. Fletcher." Rebecca nodded and settled her children around the table. Emma sat rigidly upright, her jaw set in determination. Lucas fidgeted with a pencil he'd brought from home. Sophia held a small stuffed rabbit that she rarely took anywhere anymore, a sign of how unsettled she felt. At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," Rebecca called. Marcus Fletcher entered the room looking like a man who'd aged a decade in the past week. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes were rimmed with red. But what struck Rebecca most was how small he seemed, as if the weight of his confession had physically diminished him. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, though the words felt strange. He was thanking her for the opportunity to face his victims. Marcus took the chair across from Rebecca, his movements careful and deliberate. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched until Sophia, with the fearlessness of childhood, broke. "Why did you kill our daddy?" The blunt question hit the room like a thunderclap. Marcus's face crumpled, and Rebecca saw him struggle to maintain composure. "I didn't mean to," he said quietly, speaking directly to Sophia. "I made a mistake. At work, a very bad mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Lucas asked, his voice harder than his sister's. Marcus looked at Rebecca, as if asking permission to continue. She nodded curtly. "My job was to check all the safety equipment every morning before the workers started their jobs. I was supposed to make sure all the ropes and harnesses were strong and safe. But that morning, I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been." "Why not?" Emma demanded. Marcus flinched at her tone but answered honestly. "Because I was upset about my own problems. My wife was leaving me, and I had been drinking the night before. I was angry and distracted, and I did a quick, sloppy job checking the equipment. So Daddy's rope broke because you were drunk?" Emma's voice was ice cold. "I wasn't drunk that morning," Marcus said quickly. "But I had a hangover, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I missed seeing that your father's safety harness had a worn cable that should have been replaced." Rebecca watched her children process this information. She could see Emma's anger building, Lucas's confusion deepening, and Sophia's struggle to understand concepts that were too adult for her 6-year-old mind. "What happened to Daddy when he fell?" Sophia asked. Rebecca started to intervene. This was too much detail for her youngest, but Marcus was already answering. "He fell very quickly," Marcus said gently. "The doctors said he wouldn't have felt any pain. He was thinking about coming home to you and your mom and brother and sister." "How do you know what he was thinking?" Emma challenged. Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Because I was a father too. And when I'm at work, I'm always thinking about coming home to my family." Lucas corrected. "You said you were a father." Marcus's composure finally cracked. "My son Jake died 6 months ago. In a construction accident, just like your dad." The revelation stunned the children into silence. Rebecca hadn't mentioned this detail when she'd told them about Marcus's confession. "Was it your fault too?" Emma asked, her voice slightly less hostile. "No," Marcus said. "But it felt like punishment for what I did to your father. Like the universe was making things even." "That's stupid," Lucas said suddenly. "The universe doesn't work that way. Bad things just happen sometimes." Marcus looked at the 9-year-old with something approaching admiration. "You're probably right. But when you've done something terrible, you start looking for patterns that aren't really there." "Why did you come to our house?" Emma asked. "Why didn't you just mail us a letter or something?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I needed to see who you were. I needed to understand what I had taken from the world when I took your father away." "And what did you figure out?" Rebecca asked, speaking for the first time since the conversation began. Marcus looked around the table at each of them before answering. "That David Martinez raised incredible children. That he was loved in a way most people never are. And that my carelessness didn't just end one life, it changed 4 lives forever." "5 lives," Sophia said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked. "Your life changed too," Sophia said to Marcus. You said you lost your son, so it's 5 lives that got changed. The simple observation from a 6-year-old hung in the air, and Rebecca realized that her youngest daughter had grasped something the adults were struggling with, that Marcus Fletcher was as much a victim of his own negligence as they were. Why? Should we care if your life got changed? Emma asked, but her tone had lost some of its edge. You did it to yourself. You're right, Marcus said. I did it to myself. But caring about someone's pain doesn't mean you have to forgive them for causing your own pain. It was such an adult concept that Rebecca was surprised when Emma nodded slowly, as if she understood. What do you want from us? Lucas asked. Nothing, Marcus said immediately. I just wanted you to know the truth about what happened to your father. And I wanted to try to give you something back. The money, Emma said. The insurance policy, yes. It's not nearly enough, but it's all I have. Mom doesn't want your money, Lucas said loyally. Marcus looked at Rebecca. I know, but maybe someday. She'd change her mind. Not for me, but for you kids. Rebecca felt the weight of 3 pairs of young eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd respond. The insurance policy was still sitting in her kitchen drawer, and she still hadn't decided what to do with it. Why don't you just give it to some other family, she asked. Some family that needs help, but doesn't have to think about where the money came from? Because this money is specifically for you, Marcus said. It's what your father should have earned if he'd lived to retirement. He should have been able to leave you. But he didn't leave it to us, Emma pointed out. You're trying to leave it to us. That's true, Marcus admitted. But sometimes when you break something, you have to try to fix it, even if the fix isn't perfect. Sophia had been playing with her stuffed rabbit's ears while listening to this exchange. Suddenly she looked up at Marcus with an expression of intense concentration. Are you sorry? She asked. More sorry than I know how to say, Marcus replied. Do. You miss your son every day. Then you know how we feel about missing Daddy, Marcus nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I do know. Sophia considered this, then reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the drawing she'd made for Marcus that morning he left their house. I still have your picture, she said. I didn't know if I should throw it away or keep it. Rebecca's heart clenched as she recognized the crayon drawing of their family plus Marcus around the kitchen table. What do you think you should do with it? Marcus asked gently. Sophia studied the picture, then looked at Marcus. I think I should give it to you. Because even though you made a really bad mistake, you're still a person. And persons should have pictures of when they were happy. The simplicity of her 6-year-old logic broke something open in the room. Marcus accepted the drawing with shaking hands, staring at it as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever been given. Thank you, he whispered. I'll keep it always. Emma was wiping her eyes, though she was trying to hide it. Lucas was staring at his sister with newfound respect. And Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the tight knot of anger she'd been carrying. Mr. Fletcher, Emma said formally, I have one more question. Yes? If you could go back and change what happened, would you? Yes, Marcus said without hesitation. I would give anything to go back and do my job right that morning. Even if it meant your son might still be alive? Emma pressed, her question more sophisticated than her 12 years should have allowed. Marcus was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the implications. I don't know if those things are connected, he said finally, but yes, even then. Because what I did was wrong, regardless of what happened to me later. Emma nodded, satisfied with his answer. Rebecca looked around the table at her children, at Emma's grudging acceptance, Lucas's thoughtful expression, and Sophia's innocent compassion, and realized they were handling this situation with more grace than many adults would have managed. What happens now? She asked Marcus. Now I leave, he said simply. I go back to Cleveland, or maybe further west. I try to find a way to live with what I've done. And the insurance policy. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded papers, placing them on the table between them. "I'm leaving it with Father Mackenzie. If you ever decide you want it, he'll give it to you. If not, he can donate the money to the church or a charity, whatever feels right to you." Rebecca stared at the policy. $500,000 sitting on a table in a church meeting room, representing her family's tragedy transformed into financial opportunity. "Kids," she said quietly, "what do you think we should do?" It was the first time she'd asked them to weigh in on an adult decision of this magnitude, but somehow it felt appropriate. This choice would affect their futures as much as hers. Emma spoke first. "I think we should take it. Not because we forgive him, but because Dad would want us to go to college." Lucas nodded agreement. "Dad always said education was the most important thing, and we can use the money for good things." Sophia was still holding her stuffed rabbit, but she was looking at Marcus with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. "What do you think, baby?" Rebecca asked. "I think Mr. Fletcher should know that we're going to use his money to help other people too," Sophia said. "So something good comes from the sad thing." Marcus's face transformed at these words, hope and gratitude warring with his persistent guilt. Rebecca reached across the table and picked up the insurance policy. "We'll take it," she said, "but with conditions." "Anything," Marcus said. "Part of it goes into college funds for the kids. Part of it goes to construction safety programs, so maybe other families won't go through what we've gone through. And part of it goes to help families who've lost someone in workplace accidents." Marcus nodded eagerly. That sounds like something David would approve of." "And you leave Millbrook tonight," Rebecca continued. "You don't come back, you don't call, you don't try to check up on us. We're accepting your money, but we're not becoming your family." "I understand." Rebecca stood up, and the children followed her lead. The meeting was over. As they prepared to leave, Marcus spoke one last time. "Mrs. Martinez, Emma, Lucas, Sophia, I want you to know that meeting you, seeing the kind of people you are, it's the only good thing to come out of the worst mistake of my life." Emma surprised everyone by extending her hand to Marcus. "I hope you find some peace," she said with a maturity that made Rebecca's chest tight with pride. Lucas shook hands too. Though he didn't say anything, Sophia walked up to Marcus and without warning gave him a quick hug. "I hope you stop being so sad," she said simply. Rebecca was the last to approach him. They stood facing each other in the soft light of the church meeting room, two people whose lives had been forever connected by tragedy and circumstance. "I may never forgive you," she said quietly, "but I don't hate you anymore." Marcus nodded, understanding that this was as much grace as he could hope for. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." As the Martinez family walked out into the cool November evening, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, not closure exactly, but the possibility of it. Behind them, Marcus Fletcher sat alone in the meeting room, holding a child's drawing and preparing to begin the long journey toward whatever redemption might look like for a man who had lost everything and found in return a moment of undeserved mercy. 3 months later, Rebecca stood in the kitchen of their renovated house, watching through the window as Emma helped Sophia build a snowman in the backyard. The insurance money had allowed them to fix the leaky roof, replace the old furnace, and even add a small deck where David had always dreamed of putting one. But more than the physical improvements, something fundamental had shifted in their family dynamic. The healing hadn't been immediate or simple. In the weeks following their meeting with Marcus, each family member had processed the experience differently. Emma had thrown herself into research about construction safety regulations, eventually starting a blog called Building Safe Futures that had garnered attention from several industry publications. Her 7th grade teacher had suggested she submit her work to a national youth journalism contest. Lucas had surprised everyone by asking to visit the construction site where David had died. Rebecca had initially resisted, But after consulting with a grief counselor, she'd arranged for a supervised tour during the building's completion phase. Lucas had stood for a long time at the spot where his father fell, then announced that he wanted to become a safety engineer when he grew up. So nobody else's dad has to fall, he'd said with 9-year-old certainty. Sophia's healing had been the most visible. She'd started drawing again, but her pictures had evolved. Instead of stick figures around kitchen tables, she now drew elaborate scenes of construction workers wearing bright safety gear, families holding hands under protective umbrellas, and angels watching over building sites. Her kindergarten teacher had called them remarkably sophisticated for her age. For Rebecca herself, the process had been more complicated. The money had provided financial security she hadn't felt since David's death, but it had also forced her to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, forgiveness, and the complexity of human nature. She'd started attending a support group for families affected by workplace accidents, where she discovered that her story, while unique in its details, shared common themes with many others. The transformation in their lives became most apparent during the Christmas season. For the first time since David's death, Rebecca had felt capable of creating new traditions instead of merely surviving the old ones. They'd volunteered at a shelter for families affected by construction accidents, one of the organizations they'd chosen to support with Marcus's insurance money. Seeing other families struggling with similar losses had given Rebecca a broader perspective on grief and recovery. On Christmas morning, as the children opened presents that included new art supplies for Sophia, engineering books for Lucas, and a professional camera for Emma's journalism interests, Rebecca had felt something she'd almost forgotten: genuine optimism about their future. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late January. Addressed in handwriting Rebecca recognized immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, though she couldn't have said whether from anxiety or curiosity. Dear Mrs. Martinez and family, I hope this letter finds you well, and that I'm not overstepping boundaries by writing. I know our agreement was that I would leave and not contact you, but I felt you should know about some developments that might interest you. After leaving Millbrook, I drove to Cleveland to settle my son Jake's affairs. While going through his papers, I discovered that he had been working on a research project about construction safety improvements. He had compiled data on accident prevention techniques and had planned to submit his findings to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I have donated Jake's research to the construction safety program you specified as one of the beneficiaries of the insurance money. The program director, Dr. Sarah Chun, told me that Jake's work will be incorporated into new training protocols that could prevent the kind of accident that killed your husband. I thought you should know that your decision to use part of the money for safety programs has already begun saving lives. 3 construction companies in Ohio have implemented new harness inspection procedures. Based partly on Jake's research, Dr. Cheen estimates that these changes will prevent at least a dozen serious accidents over the next 5 years. I have relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, where I am working with a construction safety nonprofit. I am not writing to seek contact or forgiveness, but simply to let you know that the seeds you planted with your generosity have grown into something that would make both our sons proud. I think about your family often and hope that you are finding peace. Respectfully, Marcus Fletcher. P.S. I have Sophia's drawing framed on my desk. It reminds me every day that there is still goodness in the world, even in the midst of tragedy. Rebecca read the letter twice before calling the children into the living room. Emma was at her computer working on another blog post. Lucas was building an elaborate Lego construction site, and Sophia was drawing at the kitchen table. I got a letter from Marcus Fletcher, she announced without preamble. The children's reactions were immediate and varied. Emma looked up sharply from her laptop, Lucas's hand stilled on his Lego blocks, and Sophia dropped her crayon. What does he want? Emma asked, her protective instincts immediately activated. He's not asking for anything, Rebecca assured her. He's telling us about something that happened with the money we accepted." She read them the letter, watching their faces as she described Jake Fletcher's research and its impact on construction safety protocols. "So the money is actually helping people?" Lucas asked when she finished. "More than we realized when we decided to take it," Rebecca confirmed. Sophia had been unusually quiet during the reading. Finally, she spoke up. "Does this mean Daddy's accident helped save other daddies?" The question hung in the air, and Rebecca realized her 6-year-old daughter had grasped something profound about the ripple effects of tragedy and healing. "In a way, yes," Rebecca said carefully. "It means that what happened to Daddy, and what Mr. Fletcher learned from his mistake, is helping make construction sites safer for other families." Emma closed her laptop and came to sit with them. "I want to write about this for my blog, about how accidents can lead to improvements if people learn from them." "That sounds like a great idea," Rebecca said. "Can I help?" Lucas asked. "I know a lot about construction safety now. And I can draw pictures," Sophia added, "of workers being safe." Rebecca looked at her 3 children and felt a familiar swell of pride. They were taking their tragedy and transforming it into something purposeful. Over the following weeks, the family threw themselves into learning more about construction safety advocacy. Emma's blog post about Jake Fletcher's research went viral, attracting attention from safety organizations and construction companies across the country. Lucas created detailed diagrams showing proper safety equipment usage. Sophia's artwork was featured in a safety awareness campaign by the National Construction Safety Foundation. The pinnacle of their advocacy efforts came in March, when Dr. Sarah Chun invited them to speak at the annual Construction Safety Conference in Chicago. The family spent weeks preparing their presentation, with each child contributing their unique perspective on how David's death had affected them, and how they'd chosen to honor his memory. The night before the conference, Rebecca sat in their hotel room watching her children rehearse their speeches. Emma had prepared a technical presentation about accident prevention. Lucas had created a demonstration of proper safety equipment inspection. Sophia had made a picture book showing the importance of following safety rules. "Are you nervous?" Rebecca asked them. "A little," Emma admitted. "But it feels important. Like we're doing something Daddy would be proud of," Lucas added. Sophia looked up from her picture book. "I think Daddy and Jake are friends now, in heaven, and they're happy that we're helping keep other people safe." The next morning, the Martinez family took the stage in front of 300 construction industry professionals. Rebecca spoke first, sharing their story with raw honesty about the devastating impact of workplace accidents on families. She talked about the anger, the grief, the financial struggles, and the long journey toward healing. Then Emma presented her research on safety protocol improvements, her 7th-grade voice clear and confident, as she addressed adults who had decades of industry experience. Her presentation included data on accident reduction, cost-benefit analyses of safety investments, and recommendations for industry-wide reforms. Lucas followed with his demonstration of proper equipment inspection techniques, showing the audience exactly how Marcus's negligence had led to David's death and how simple protocol changes could prevent similar tragedies. Finally, Sophia took the microphone, her small voice filling the large auditorium as she shared her picture book. Her story was simple but powerful: workers going home safely to their families every day because they followed safety rules. The audience's response was overwhelming. Construction executives approached them with commitments to implement new safety protocols. Safety organizations invited them to speak at additional conferences. Most importantly, workers came up to share their own stories and thanked the family for helping them understand the human cost of safety shortcuts. During the lunch break, Dr. Chun approached their table with unexpected news. "I wanted to let you know," she said, "that Marcus Fletcher has been following your advocacy work. He asked me to give you this." She handed Rebecca a check made out to the National Construction Safety Foundation. The amount was substantial, clearly representing months of Marcus's salary from his work with the Phoenix nonprofit. He also wanted you to know, Dr. Chun continued, that your family's presentation today has been live-streamed to construction sites across the country. The response has been extraordinary. We're already getting commitments from major companies to adopt the safety protocols you've advocated for. That evening, as the family sat in the hotel restaurant celebrating their successful presentation, Rebecca felt a profound sense of completion. Not closure, she'd learned that grief never truly closes, but completion of a journey from victimhood to purpose. "Mom," Emma said suddenly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Mr. Fletcher. He's been helping safety organizations. And he helped get Jake's research published. And now he's donating money to the same cause we're supporting." Rebecca nodded. "That's true. So in a weird way, we're all working toward the same thing now. Even though we're not talking to each other." Lucas looked thoughtful. "It's like we're on the same team, but playing from different positions." Sophia, who had been drawing on her napkin, looked up with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from her 6-year-old perspective. Maybe that's how sorry works. Not saying it once, but doing it over and over by helping people. Rebecca stared at her youngest daughter, struck by the profundity of her observation. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe true repentance wasn't a single act of confession, but a lifetime of making amends through actions. 2 weeks after the conference, Rebecca made a decision that surprised even herself. She wrote a letter to Marcus Fletcher, care of the Phoenix Construction Safety Nonprofit. "Dear Marcus, Dr. Chun told us about your donation to the Safety Foundation and your continued work in accident prevention. I wanted you to know that your efforts, combined with Jake's research, have led to measurable improvements in construction safety protocols. Emma's blog now reaches thousands of people each month. Lucas has decided to study engineering with a focus on workplace safety. Sophia continues to create art that reminds people why safety matters. We are not writing to offer forgiveness. That remains a private matter for our family. But we wanted you to know that your commitment to preventing other families from experiencing what we've experienced has been noted and appreciated. Our family has found purpose in advocacy work, and we understand that you have found yours in direct service to safety organizations. Perhaps there is something meaningful in the fact that David's death has led to multiple people dedicating their lives to protecting other workers. We hope you continue to find peace in your work. The Martinez family." Rebecca never expected a response, and she didn't receive one. But 6 months later, she learned through Dr. Chun that Marcus had been promoted to director of the Phoenix Safety Nonprofit and had established a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents in workplace accidents. The scholarship was named the David Martinez Memorial Fund. A year after their first meeting with Marcus Fletcher, Rebecca stood in the same church where they'd confronted him, but this time for a celebration. Emma had won the National Youth Journalism Contest for her series on construction safety. Lucas had been accepted into a summer engineering program for gifted students. Sophia's artwork was being displayed in the state capitol as part of a worker safety awareness campaign. Father Mackenzie had organized a small reception to honor their advocacy work, and the entire community had turned out to support them. As Rebecca looked around at the gathering, teachers, neighbors, local business owners, even some construction workers who had been moved by their story, she realized that their family's tragedy had become a source of inspiration for others. "You know," Father Mackenzie said as he joined her at the refreshment table, "when you first came to me about meeting with Mr. Fletcher, I wasn't sure it was the right decision." "And now?" Rebecca asked. "Now I think it was exactly what needed to happen. Not just for your family's healing, but for all the families who will benefit from the safety improvements you've advocated for." Rebecca nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had begun with a knock on her door during a November storm. A stranger's confession had torn open old wounds, but it had also set in motion a series of actions that had prevented other families from experiencing similar losses. As the evening wound down and the family prepared to go home, Sophia tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. "Mom, I want to make one more picture." "What kind of picture?" "A picture of all the daddies who got to come home safe, because we helped make the rules better." Rebecca knelt down to her daughter's level. "That sounds like a beautiful picture, but it might be a very big picture." Sophia considered this seriously. "Then I'll make it on a really big piece of paper." As they walked home under the streetlights of Maple Street, passing the house where Marcus Fletcher had slept on their couch and changed their lives forever, Rebecca reflected on the complicated nature of healing. Their family had been broken by tragedy and negligence, but they had chosen to transform their pain into purpose. They would never forget David, and they would never stop missing him. But they had learned that loss could coexist with hope, that anger could evolve into action, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could lead to the most meaningful changes. The stranger who had knocked on their door during a storm had taken away their father and husband. But in the end, he had also given them something precious: the knowledge that they had the power to ensure that other families would never have to experience the same loss. And perhaps, Rebecca thought as she tucked her children into bed that night, that was the closest thing to redemption that any of them, including Marcus Fletcher, could hope to find out 2 years after the church confrontation. Rebecca Martinez received a phone call that would once again change everything. She was in her office at the newly established David Martinez Center for Construction Safety, a non-profit organization that had grown out of their family's advocacy work, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Rebecca, there's a call for you." "On line 2. The woman says it's urgent and concerns Marcus Fletcher." Rebecca's hand froze over the safety protocol she'd been reviewing. In the 24 months since their last contact, Marcus had remained a distant figure in their lives, someone they knew was continuing his safety work in Phoenix, but whom they never spoke to directly. "Rebecca Martinez speaking," she said carefully. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Dr. Amanda Sullivan from Phoenix General Hospital. I'm calling about Marcus Fletcher. He's listed you as his emergency contact." Rebecca's breath caught. "Emergency contact? There must be some mistake. He was brought in this morning after a construction site accident. He's been asking for you, and Dr. Sullivan paused. "Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Fletcher is dying." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Whatever complex feelings she harbored about Marcus Fletcher, she had never wished him harm. What happened? He was conducting a safety inspection at a construction site when part of a scaffold collapsed. He pushed 2 workers out of the way and was crushed by falling debris. He saved their lives, but the doctor's voice trailed off. Rebecca sank into her chair. "How long does he have?" "Hours, maybe less. He's been conscious intermittently, and he keeps asking for you and your children. He says there's something he needs to tell you." Rebecca looked out her office window at the bustling city, where she'd built a new life dedicated to preventing exactly this kind of tragedy. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus Fletcher, who had caused a construction accident through negligence, was dying because he'd prevented one through heroism. "I'll be there," she heard herself saying. "We'll be there." 4 hours later, Rebecca walked through the corridors of Phoenix General Hospital with Emma, now 14 and taller than her mother. Lucas, 11 and carrying a notebook where he'd been sketching safety equipment designs. And Sophia, 8 years old, and clutching a folder of her latest artwork. The flight to Phoenix had been tense, filled with questions none of them could answer. Why had Marcus listed them as his emergency contacts? What could he possibly need to tell them that was so urgent? And perhaps most importantly, how did they feel about seeing him again under these circumstances? Emma had been characteristically direct. "I don't understand why we're doing this. He's not family." Lucas had been more thoughtful. "Maybe he doesn't have anyone else." Sophia, with her unique perspective, had simply said, "People shouldn't die alone, even if they made mistakes." Dr. Sullivan met them outside Marcus's room, her expression grave. "I should prepare you. He's conscious but weak. The injuries are extensive. We're keeping him comfortable, but—" "We understand," Rebecca said quietly. "He also wanted me to give you this." Dr. Sullivan handed Rebecca a sealed envelope. "He insisted I not open it, said it was for your family only." Rebecca pocketed the envelope and pushed open the hospital room door. Marcus Fletcher looked nothing like the man who had stood on her doorstep 2.5 years ago. His face was gray with pain, his body connected to various machines, and his eyes held the unmistakable knowledge of approaching death. But when he saw them enter, his expression transformed. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of course we came," Rebecca said, pulling chairs close to his bed for the children. Marcus's eyes moved from face to face, taking in how much they'd grown and changed. "Emma, I've been following your work. The congressional testimony last month about mandatory safety training was brilliant." Emma flushed slightly. At 14, she had become the youngest person ever to testify before Congress about construction safety reform. "Thank you," she said formally. "And Lucas," Marcus continued. His breathing labored. "Dr. Chun showed me your engineering project. The automatic harness inspection system could revolutionize the industry." Lucas nodded seriously. "I've been working on improvements based on what happened to Dad, and to you now." Sophia stepped closer to the bed, studying Marcus with the fearless curiosity that hadn't changed since she was 6. "Does it hurt very much?" "Not anymore," Marcus said gently. "The doctors gave me medicine for the pain." "Good," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "I brought you some pictures. Want to see them?" As Sophia spread her artwork on the bedside table, Rebecca found herself marveling at the surreal nature of the situation. Here they were, gathered around the deathbed of the man who had killed David, and her children were sharing their accomplishments with him as if he were a beloved relative. "These are beautiful, Sophia," Marcus said, examining her drawings of construction workers in protective gear. "You've gotten so much better at drawing people." "I practice every day," Sophia said proudly. "Mom says practice makes perfect, and I want my safety pictures to be perfect so people will pay attention to them." Marcus looked at Rebecca with something approaching wonder. "You've raised incredible children." "They've raised themselves, mostly," Rebecca replied. "I just tried not to get in their way." A nurse entered to check Marcus's vitals, and during the brief interruption, Rebecca opened the envelope Dr. Sullivan had given her. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Marcus's careful handwriting. "To the Martinez family, if you are reading this, it means I am dying and you have come to see me one last time. I need you to know several things that I was never able to tell you properly. First, the night I stayed in your home was the first time in 2 years that I had felt like a human being instead of a monster. Your kindness gave me hope that redemption was possible, even for someone like me. Second, every day since Jake's death, I have carried his safety research and Sophia's drawing with me. They remind me that good can come from tragedy if we have the courage to act. Third, I have never stopped working to honor David's memory. Every life saved through improved safety protocols, every accident prevented through better training, every family that doesn't have to experience what you experienced, all of it is dedicated to making amends for my failure. Finally, I need you to know that I am dying the way I lived the last 2.5 years, trying to protect other people's families. Today I saved 2 workers from the same kind of falling debris that killed your husband. I couldn't save David, but I saved them. You gave me a second chance at being human. I hope I use it well. All my love and eternal gratitude, Marcus Fletcher." Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. When she looked up, she found Marcus watching her with an expression of quiet peace. "You read it," he said. "I did." Do you understand now why I listed you as my emergency contact? Rebecca thought about it. Because we're the only family you have left, Marcus nodded weakly. When Jake died, I lost my son. When my wife left, I lost my marriage. But somehow, through the worst thing I ever did, I gained. Not a family exactly, but something like it. A connection to people who mattered. Emma had been listening to this exchange with growing emotion. Suddenly she stood up and moved closer to Marcus's bed. Mr. Fletcher, I need to tell you something. What is it, Emma? I used to hate you, really, really hate you. I blamed you for everything. Dad's death, Mom's sadness, having to grow up too fast. I wanted you to suffer. Marcus nodded. You had every right to hate me. But then I started researching safety protocols for my blog, and I kept finding your name. You've been working with safety organizations for years. You've helped create training programs that have prevented dozens of accidents. You've saved more lives than you took. Tears were streaming down Emma's 14-year-old face. I realized that hating you was keeping me from seeing that you've spent every day since Dad died trying to make up for what you did. And today, Today you died saving people, the way Dad would have saved people. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand, and Emma, after a moment's hesitation, took it. Your father would be so proud of the woman you're becoming, Marcus whispered. Lucas approached the other side of the bed. Mr. Fletcher, remember when I said I wanted to be a safety engineer? I remember. I'm going to invent systems that make it impossible for anyone to make the kind of mistake you made. Not because I'm angry at you anymore, but because I want to help you finish what you started. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. That would mean everything to me. Sophia had been unusually quiet during these exchanges, but now she climbed onto the chair beside Marcus's bed. Mr. Fletcher, are you scared? A little, Marcus admitted. When Dad died, Mom told us he went to heaven to watch over us. Do you think you'll see him there? The question hung in the air, and Rebecca found herself holding her breath for Marcus's answer. I hope so, Marcus said finally. I hope I get the chance to apologize to him properly, and to tell him what amazing children he has. I think he already knows that, Sophia said seriously. But maybe you can be friends in heaven. And maybe you can both watch over construction workers together. The simple innocence of her 8-year-old theology broke something open in the room. Marcus began to cry deep, healing sobs that seemed to release years of accumulated grief and guilt. I'm so sorry, he whispered, over and over. I'm so sorry. Rebecca found herself moving to his bedside without conscious decision. Marcus, look at me. He turned his tear-filled eyes to hers. David would forgive you, she said quietly. I know my husband, and I know his heart. He would forgive you. And you? Marcus asked. Can you forgive me? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, searching her heart for the truth. I forgave you a long time ago, she said finally. I just didn't realize it until now. The monitors around Marcus's bed began to change their rhythm, and Rebecca could see that his time was running short. Is there anything else you need? She asked. Marcus smiled weakly. Could you tell me about David? What was he like as a father? And so, in the last hour of Marcus Fletcher's life, the Martinez family shared stories about David. They told Marcus about his terrible cooking, his amazing bedtime stories, his habit of singing off-key in the shower. They described his dreams for his children's futures, his pride in Rebecca's strength, his unwavering belief that people were fundamentally good. As they talked, Marcus's breathing grew shallower, but his eyes remained bright with interest. He laughed at their funny memories and nodded knowingly at their descriptions of David's character. He sounds like he was exactly the kind of father I always wanted to be, Marcus said as his voice grew weaker. You would have been, Sophia said confidently. If your son was still alive, you would have been the best daddy ever. Because you learned how to apologize the right way. These were the last words Marcus Fletcher heard. His eyes closed peacefully, and the monitors flatlined with a steady, final tone. Dr. Sullivan entered with a team of nurses, but Rebecca could see immediately that there was nothing more to be done. Marcus Fletcher had died surrounded by the family of the man he'd killed, forgiven, and at peace. As they gathered their belongings to leave, Rebecca found herself thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A stranger's knock on a stormy night had led to years of pain, growth, advocacy, and ultimately, a kind of redemption that none of them could have imagined. Outside the hospital, as they waited for their taxi to the airport, Emma spoke first. "That was the strangest thing I've ever experienced." "Strange how?" Rebecca asked. "I don't know. It felt like we were saying goodbye to family, but he was the man who killed Dad." Lucas nodded. "It's like he became part of our story somehow. Not a good part, but not completely bad either." Sophia was holding a new drawing she'd made while they waited, a picture of two men in hard hats standing on clouds, watching over construction workers below. "I think some people come into our lives to hurt us," she said with 8-year-old wisdom, "and some people come to help us. But sometimes the same person does both." On the flight home, Rebecca reflected on Sophia's words. Marcus Fletcher had indeed been both destroyer and catalyst for their family. His negligence had shattered their world, but his confession had ultimately led them to find purpose in their pain. The David Martinez Center for Construction Safety now operated in 12 states. Emma's journalism had influenced national safety legislation. Lucas's engineering projects were being studied by major universities. Sophia's artwork had become the face of several safety awareness campaigns. None of this would have existed without Marcus Fletcher's terrible mistake and his subsequent quest for redemption. As the plane descended toward their home city, Rebecca made a mental note to call Dr. Chun in the morning. They would need to find a new director for the Phoenix Safety nonprofit, and she had some ideas about how to honor Marcus's memory while continuing his work. The stranger who had knocked on their door during a November storm was gone. But the ripple effects of that night, both destructive and healing, would continue for generations. And perhaps, Rebecca thought as she watched her children sleep peacefully in their airplane seats, that was the most anyone could hope for. That their life, however flawed, would ultimately contribute to something larger and more meaningful than themselves. Marcus Fletcher had achieved that. In death, as in his final years of life, he had become part of something bigger than his mistakes, part of a movement to ensure that no other family would have to experience the loss that had defined them all. 5 years later, Rebecca stood at the podium of the National Construction Safety Summit, looking out at an audience of over 2,000 industry professionals. The annual conference had grown from a small gathering to the most important safety event in the country, and this year marked a special milestone. "Today," Rebecca began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Marcus Fletcher Memorial Safety Protocol, which has prevented over 300 construction fatalities across North America." The audience erupted in applause, but Rebecca's eyes found her family in the front row. Emma, now 19 and a sophomore at MIT studying engineering journalism, gave her a thumbs up. Lucas, 16 and already accepted into several prestigious engineering programs, nodded encouragingly. Sophia, 13 and taller than Emma had been at that age, held up a tablet displaying her latest digital artwork, a dynamic illustration of construction workers using advanced safety technology. "But this conference isn't just about statistics," Rebecca continued. "It's about the families behind those numbers, the children who still have their parents, the spouses who don't have to plan funerals, the grandparents who get to watch their grandchildren grow up." She paused, looking at a photograph displayed on the large screen behind her, a picture of David in his hard hat, taken just weeks before his death. "My husband David Martinez died because someone was careless with safety protocols. But from That tragedy came a movement that has touched millions of lives. Today, I want to tell you about the extraordinary journey that brought us here. As Rebecca spoke, she noticed something that would have seemed impossible 10 years ago. She was able to talk about David's death, Marcus's role in it, and their family's response without the sharp edge of pain that had once made such discussions unbearable. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, a driving force for positive change. The David Martinez Center for Construction Safety now operates in 47 states, Rebecca announced. Our mobile training units have reached over 500,000 workers. Our scholarship program has sent 300 children of construction workers to college. And our research initiatives have led to breakthrough technologies that are revolutionizing workplace safety. From the audience, Dr. Sarah Chun stood up. Now in her 70s but still directing safety research, she had become like family to the Martinez clan over the years. But the real measure of our success, Dr. Chun said, taking the microphone, isn't in the programs we've created. It's in the ripple effect of compassion and forgiveness that started in a small town in November of 2022. The audience murmured with interest. Many knew parts of the Martinez family story, but few knew the complete narrative. The night Marcus Fletcher knocked on Rebecca Martinez's door, Dr. Chun continued. Two families were broken by guilt and grief. But instead of letting that brokenness define them, they chose to transform their pain into purpose. Marcus spent his final years saving lives through safety work. The Martinez family became advocates who've influenced national legislation. Together, they proved that even the worst mistakes can lead to meaningful redemption. As Dr. Chun spoke, a video began playing on the screens throughout the auditorium. It showed construction sites around the world where workers were using safety protocols developed through their advocacy. Children playing in playgrounds built by construction crews who went home safely every day. Families celebrating milestones that might never have happened without improved safety standards. Emma took the stage next, her journalism skills now polished through years of writing and speaking about safety issues. When I was 12, she said, I hated Marcus Fletcher for taking away my father. But over the years, I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or excusing someone's mistakes. It's about choosing to build something better from the pieces of what was broken. She gestured to Lucas, who joined her at the podium. My brother has spent the last 6 years developing technology that makes human error in safety inspections nearly impossible. His automated harness monitoring system is now standard equipment on construction sites across the country. Lucas, typically uncomfortable with public speaking, kept his remarks brief but impactful. I used to think my job was to prevent accidents like the one that killed my dad. But I realized my real job is to prevent the kind of suffering my family went through. Every family deserves to have their loved ones come home safely. Finally, Sophia approached the microphone. At 13, she had inherited her mother's gift for speaking and her father's passionate commitment to helping others. A lot of people ask me if I remember Marcus Fletcher, she said. I do remember him. I remember that he was sad and scared and trying to figure out how to make up for something terrible. But mostly I remember that he taught me something important about being human. The auditorium was completely silent, hanging on her words. He taught me that we all make mistakes, but what matters is what we do after we make them. Do we run away, or do we spend the rest of our lives trying to fix what we broke? Sophia pulled out a piece of paper, the original crayon drawing she'd made for Marcus when she was 6 years old. I gave this picture to Mr. Fletcher when I was little, and he kept it until the day he died. But before he died, he gave it back to me with a note. He wrote, "This picture reminded me every day that families are the most important thing in the world. Take care of yours and help other people take care of theirs." She held up the faded drawing for the audience to see. So that's what we've been doing. Taking care of our family and helping other families stay together. As the Martinez family stood together on the stage, Rebecca felt a profound sense of completion. Not the completion of their grief, that would always be with them, but the completion of a mission that had grown from the most painful experience of their lives. "Before we close today's conference," Rebecca said, "I want to share one final piece of news." The audience leaned forward expectantly. The Marcus Fletcher Foundation, established with funds from his estate and donations from safety organizations worldwide, has announced its largest initiative yet. Starting next year, we will be building the David Martinez Training Center in Phoenix, a state-of-the-art facility where construction workers from around the world will come to learn the most advanced safety protocols. The applause was thunderous, but Rebecca wasn't finished. The center will feature a memorial wall honoring all construction workers who have lost their lives on the job. But it will also feature something else, a garden where families can come to heal, to remember, and to find hope. As the conference concluded and people began to file out, Rebecca found herself surrounded by construction workers, safety professionals, and family members who had been touched by their story. Many shared their own experiences of loss and recovery. Others talked about how the Martinez family's advocacy had directly impacted their lives. One young woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, my husband uses the safety equipment your son designed. Last month, it saved his life when a cable snapped during a bridge repair. Our daughter still has her daddy because of your family's work." These moments, the personal connections, the individual stories of lives saved and families preserved, were what made all their efforts worthwhile. Later that evening, the Martinez family sat in a restaurant overlooking the city lights of Phoenix. It was the same city where Marcus Fletcher had spent his final years, where he had died saving others, and where they would soon build a training center in David's memory. "Do you think Dad would be proud of what we've built?" Emma asked, voicing the question they all carried. "I think he'd be amazed," Rebecca replied. "Not just at what we've accomplished, but at who we've become. We're not the same people we were before he died, and we're definitely not the same people we were when Marcus knocked on our door." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "It's weird to think that the worst thing that ever happened to us led to the best thing we've ever done." "Maybe that's how life works sometimes," Sophia said, wise beyond her 13 years. "Maybe the worst things and the best things are more connected than we think." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Rebecca took one last look around the city. Somewhere out there, construction workers were going home safely to their families because of protocols developed through their advocacy. Children were playing happily because their parents had learned proper safety procedures. Families were intact because a tragedy from years ago had inspired people to do better. The stranger who had knocked on their door during a November storm had taken away their father and husband. But in the end, he had also given them something immeasurable: the knowledge that even the most devastating losses could be transformed into hope for others. As they walked back to their hotel, Rebecca felt David's presence with them, not as a ghost or memory, but as a living force in the work they'd chosen to do. His legacy wasn't just in the children he'd raised or the love he'd shared, but in the countless lives that had been saved because his family had chosen to build something beautiful from the pieces of their broken world. The story that had begun with a knock on the door during a storm had become something much larger, a testament to the power of forgiveness, the possibility of redemption, and the extraordinary things that could happen when broken people chose to help heal a broken world. And in the end, perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that the families we're born into are precious, but the families we choose to create through our actions and our love can change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.